Hi, it's Donnée Patrese, and I'm going to be doing a presentation about the page turner method. And this method is how to get readers to turn the page to the very end.
I hope it's good out there.
Hey, welcome everybody. I'm happy to see you all. I'm very excited to introduce a local favorite and Vice President of the Writers of Kern, Donnée Harris. Let me read your bio. A spicy romance and romantic suspense novelist, blogger, short story writer, YouTuber, and speaker, Donnée Patrese was born and raised in Gary, Indiana, where her love for writing blossomed. She worked as a journalist at the Post-Tribune and the Indianapolis Recorder for 2 years and won an award with the Indiana Association of Black Journalists before deciding to be a full-time novelist. Lover of books and a slave to the wonders of her mind, she has published 7 books through First Draft Publishing, including the Prohibited Trilogy, Diary of a Wanted Woman, and Burned Deadly Desires. She has a BA in journalism from Butler University in Indianapolis, Indiana, and is a lifelong member of Delta 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 sorority. In 2012, Donnée Patrese moved to Bakersfield, where she and her husband raised their beautiful daughters.
It was interesting hearing all that stuff about me. I was like, oh yeah, I did all that stuff. Okay, so I just want to welcome and thank everybody for coming. I am happy to see you, and I'm happy to present my page turner method to you that I have researched and worked so hard on. So I'm going to start with tension. So tension means mental or emotional strain on a character. It also means to apply force to something which tends to stretch it. So this could be worry, anxiety, anger, or sadness, which makes it mentally and emotionally taxing on a character. So if you didn't know what tension means, that's what it means. It is important that there is an adequate amount of tension in each chapter when needed in a novel, no matter the genre or whether it's fiction or nonfiction, a creative nonfiction piece. In my 10 years of writing novels and my years as a reporter, I have learned many ways to add tension to a story. First, however, I want to go over how not to bore your readers, because this is important. So, how not to bore your readers. If you look at the first page of the handout that I gave you, it says top 6 ways you can bore your readers. Now there are more ways to bore your readers, but these are the 6 ways. There are tons of ways how to bore your readers, but these are the 6 ways that I've learned that are most important and are easily done. And as a room full of writers, I know that you understand that show, don't tell. So that's number 1, show, don't tell. When you write, it is better to show what a character is doing or feeling rather than telling your readers what they are doing or feeling. So, for example, I put anxiety. Don't write, Sharon felt extreme anxiety as she watched her daughter take the final shot. And I say that because my daughter played basketball, so. I put Sharon wrung her hands as she watched her daughter take the final shot. So basically, what I changed was, you understand that when she wrung her hands that she was feeling an emotion, and most often that emotion would be anxiety. So the next one I put on there is anger. So I put, don't write, Jeff was very upset when his wife told him she spent their savings on a new car. And if my husband knows, that could be me someday. I put, do write, Jeff flared his nostrils and balled his hand into a fist when he saw the brand new car in the driveway. So we understand he's angry at this point. You don't have to tell us that he's angry. I have a couple more that I didn't put on the handout, but like for sadness, you can put that she was sad as she watched the pallbearers carry the casket past her pew. So you don't want to write that. You want to write, tears cascaded down her cheeks as she watched the pallbearers carry the casket past her pew. So that's for sadness. So instead of saying she was sad, you can say tears cascaded down her cheeks. So that lets us know that how she was feeling without actually telling us how she was feeling. So Number two, the second way on that I have to not bore your readers I put simple is best. And I ran these through all these ways to not bore your readers. I ran these through my two daughters. One's 14 and one's 11. And they're avid readers. And I asked them, what are some ways that, you find writers bore readers? And this is one of the things that they came up with. So they say simple is best. So use simpler words or terms when writing. It is common to want to use long, big, or complicated or not so well-known terms when you write. However, it is best to sometimes use a more common or simpler word. So they said instead of using salient, you want to just say important, something that's important, instead of using a bigger word that most people don't understand. Write lush instead of opulent. And I know these are like beautiful terms and beautiful words that we want to use, but it's so difficult when you're reading a book and it can pop you right out of the story if you don't understand that word and you want to reach a wide audience. And when you're reading these words and you feel like you need a dictionary to read your piece or for someone else to read your piece, then you don't want to do that because it will just pop somebody right out of the story. And my kids said these are the big things that really turn them off on certain books. They skip through those, or they try to use context clues, but it's so difficult. Okay, so number 3, too much backstory too soon. So I had someone give me a piece to edit, and when I read through it, I noticed that the very first chapter was nothing but backstory. So the very first chapter was just the backstory on a character, how they lived, the house they lived in, the people they talked to. And I noticed I was like, the second chapter started with dialogue. So I literally told her, just take out the entire first chapter, and weave in the dialogue, weave in the backstory. So examples, putting all the history of a character or setting on the first page, saturating the chapters with backstory without any dialogue. That just won't work. And it will definitely bore a reader. So that leads us to number 4. And I hope I'm not talking too fast because I'm a fast talker. So can everybody follow? Yes. Okay. All right. So number 4, not using dialogue. Dialogue is important in giving readers a good sense of a character. A novel, memoir, or creative nonfiction piece will read like a college book report or essay with too little dialogue. So, dialogue is a great way to weave in backstory or history of a character or setting. It's also a good way to start a chapter. So, these are things that I have experienced and my daughters have experienced where there is so much narration and there's little dialogue that they just skip it. And you don't want something important to be skipped in your piece. So you want to make sure that you weave in some dialogue to add a little bit of, so that it won't be as boring, add a little bit of spice to it. So that's one thing. And they also talked about number 5, which was too much description. Description is important in a novel. We all know that. But too much can bore your readers. If you describe a house and it takes up an entire page or even half the page, you will ultimately end up boring readers. So basically, these are other things that they skip when they're reading a story. So you want to ask yourself these questions. Do these descriptions add to the story? Will readers miss the key clues if they do not have this description? Can I add some of these descriptions later? Can I put these descriptions in dialogue? And I think that's really important because you can also add these descriptions in dialogue, have 2 characters talking about the house as they enter it, instead of completely just describing, okay, this house is a ranch with pillars in the front and a fence in the front and a pool in the back. It sounds like HGTV. And you don't want your readers to read this and think, okay, this is kind of boring, I'm gonna skip it, when you know that it's something important about this house that they really need to listen to. So you want to add some of that into dialogue, and I think that's really good. If you haven't noticed already, I'm a huge fan of dialogue. I just really love it. So I talk about it a lot. Okay, and last but not least, using passive voice. So you want to use action words to tell a story. if you don't use enough action, and we're gonna get to that later, you're gonna bore your readers. So example, don't write, he was running his fingers through his thick ebony hair. Write, he ran his fingers through his thick ebony hair. You wanna use as many action words as possible. And I think that's really important. Okay, so if I didn't read that too fast, I'm gonna move on to why we're here. So now that we learned ways to keep your audience interested, let's look at ways to add tension and introduce you to my page turner method. There are 9 ways to get your reader to turn the page, and it centers on tension. And that's why I gave you the definition of tension in the beginning, because tension is what gets the people to the next chapter or continue to the end of the piece. Okay, if I can turn the page. All right, the page turner method. And I have to credit this to my dear friend Joan Raymond, and I know you guys know who she is. She was our former president before Sin and before Sandy, and I worked with her as vice president, and she basically told me, hey, get a good catchy title. And I was thinking, this is something that I've been, as a reporter and as a writer, that I have been doing for a long time, trying to figure out ways to add tension. And even with journalistic pieces, you have to be able to add tension and know how to use tension in your stories, whether it's a hard news story or a feature piece. So I was thinking really long and hard, and I thought, okay, the page turner method, because this is pretty much what you want your readers to do to turn the page. So I have 9 ways, and there are probably more, like I said before, but these are my 9 ways that I use to get your audience to turn the page. Okay, number 1, you want to balance high dramatic tension with calmer scenes. And what I mean by this is, so you want tension in your stories. However, too much of a good thing could leave the readers unable to keep up, or so emotionally and mentally stressed they can't finish the book. So what I mean by that is, I read a lot of Dan Brown books, and I don't know if anybody else is a Dan Brown fan. So he did Angels and Demons, he did The Da Vinci Code, there's a series on Peacock TV where he did The Lost Symbol. But I've read his books, and one thing about his books is you can't just read them completely in one sitting, because he uses so much tension, and they cause me anxiety. And I can't finish them in one sitting. So, not to say that's how he's written them is a bad thing, but too much of it can be a bad thing. Okay, so putting a character under continuous stress, I feel like is not as realistic. Like if you want to, okay, so I use the example of the TV show 24. And I know there might be some people who love it, so if you don't hate me, but I was not a huge fan because I thought it wasn't as realistic as it could be. Because in 24 hours, every single hour, something extreme happened to this one person. And it was like, okay, in one day, you're gonna have like the president's kidnapped and all this other stuff is happening to you, and you have to fight this, and you have to do this every hour. And every episode was an hour of the day. And I just thought this wasn't realistic. So therefore we are going to need some downtime for our readers and characters. So allow the tension to ebb and flow. You want it to have some downtime for the characters so they're not completely running around the entire time. And so that's what I mean by balancing high dramatic tension with calmer scenes. You want to basically make sure that these scenes within your story, the characters have some time to take a break, take a nap, sleep, do something other than just being full on the entire time. So, number 2, create engaging characters with contrasting goals. So this may seem obvious, but I know a lot of people who have a hard time with putting characters against each other and how to do it. So in our stories, we must have interesting and engaging characters. These characters must have opposing objectives. are protagonists or multiple protagonists and antagonists or even some side characters need to have conflicting aims. As writers, this may seem obvious. However, even your protagonists may also need to have opposing goals. They want to have different things that push against each other. So I know you see my books over here on the table. And in most of them, I have multiple main characters in the novels. So for my first book, Prohibited, which I mentioned before at my table that I was sitting at, it took me 5 years to write. So I just want to throw that in there because I don't want anybody to feel bad about taking forever to write a book, okay? It took me 5 years to write that novel. But in that novel, I started out with 2 characters, 2 main protagonists. And then a third character decided to enter. So then I ended up with 3 main protagonists. But the thing about it is that each one has a different objective. They each want to go against each other. So they're all good people, but half of them don't like each other. And I would say in these stories, you need, they have to want different things. So for example, the main character wanted a man she fell in love with. That man was married, and his wife was the third character that had something to say. So they each had different goals, but they were all pushing against each other. And then there was an antagonist in the story who wants to mess it all up. So that's something that you can do to add tension to your stories. So, number 3, increase tension by making characters active. And that goes back to how not to bore your readers. You want to make sure that each character is extremely active in the story. If a character's personality is a passive one, then you can use dialogue to make sure that you get that across. You don't want to use passive voice to get that across. You want to make sure that you use some dialogue to say, okay, this is how that person's character is, instead of using, like we said before, passive voice. If your characters are not actively opposing each other, there won't be any tension. So when I mean by making characters active, meaning they're doing things. It's just like all of us humans are. We're gonna do things. And if your characters aren't authentic, they're gonna be, you don't want them to be sitting around too much. So you wanna go back to the tension with calmer scenes. So the calmer scenes is when they're not completely there doing their life. And then in this scene, you want to make sure that they're completely running around and going crazy with like a chicken with their head cut off, something like that. Number 4, use twists and eye openers effectively. So you want to make sure your characters' about faces or plot twists or revelations count. You don't want to just throw them in there all willy-nilly. You want to make sure that they count for something. These can be centered around the climax or the needed transformation that each character makes. It is sometimes helpful when a character does an about face and goes against the grain of their own personalities in the story at just the right moment. I believe this is where you need a critique group or beta readers early on to let you know if these things are used successfully. So you don't want to, and I was saying before, I was talking to the group at my table, that you don't want to completely edit your own piece, because you can't see those mistakes. You can't see if those things work. So you want to make sure that you have somebody, beta readers or somebody in a critique group, to look at your piece, and they can tell you if you've hit the mark with these revelations. And the big thing is that each character has to have a transformation. You want your character from the beginning of the piece to the end to have some kind of transformation. They have to change in some way. They have to have a revelation in some way. And you want to make sure that you hit the mark with those. So I suggest having other people read your piece. You don't want to just stick to reading it yourself, especially if you're a self-published author. Because those type of things can, if you don't catch them, they can bore your readers and they can pop people out of the story. And you don't want to do that. All right. Moving along, keep adding complications to characters' arcs. So, Conflict is the name of the game when it comes to a good story. Multiple conflicts in a story can add an amazing amount of tension. Your characters need to go through a lot of complications that add to their transformation. The bigger change in their arc, the better the story. So you have to make your characters' lives miserable at some point. And I love to do that. So in my book, Burn Deadly Desires, I put the pressure on. I put it on really big for my characters. And in that book, I also have multiple main characters. I love to do that. I just feel like in a story, when you tell a story from multiple angles, that it adds a lot of tension and it adds a lot of spice to the story. And as in my bio, as you see, I'm a spicy romance writer. So I have to add lots of spice. It sets up, making their lives miserable sets up for a good resolution and putting the pressure on a character. It helps them to transform, which is what I said before. You want a transformation in your characters. Even if at the end of the book, like I have a series, I have a trilogy, and even at the end of that, you want each book, you still want, even if there's cliffhangers, you still want to make sure that they have a transformation at the end. That's key to a good book. Even if nothing is settled, you still want to make sure that they have changed from book to book to book. Okay, number 6. And I think I'm okay with time. All right. Number 6, create internal and external conflict for characters. This is nothing new to, I'm sure, a room full of writers, that you need to have conflict to not just be external, where outside issues like weather, other people can add problems for characters, but there needs to be internal conflict as well. Internal conflicts can be low self-esteem, bitterness, a disdain for society, and many other feelings a character has that can add to the conflict in the story. External conflicts can be weather, people, animals, seasons, many other things that can add to conflict. You can also show these with narration or inner and outer dialogue. So I don't want to toot my own horn, but I'm pretty good with inner dialogue. Because I love dialogue. I just like the characters to speak. And one thing about inner dialogue, and it helps to push along the story. And there could be a spot where you don't have any actual dialogue, but you have a lot of inner dialogue that actually adds to the story. It takes the place of that dialogue. And that's also a way where you can show active voice or show a character as being passive by using inner dialogue. And outer dialogue is also good for that too, but I really enjoy writing inner dialogue so that you can see exactly how a character feels about a certain situation. And that's what I mean by create internal and external conflict for characters. You want to have their experience, their life experience play out in the story. And I think that is completely important to just everything in a novel, in a nonfiction piece. Okay, so number 7, stay away from slayers of tension. So imagine you're all set up. You have great inner and outer conflict. There is tense dialogue, and you're reading this, right? And then suddenly the author throws in too much narration or too much description that pops you out of the scene and lessens the tension. So the 6 ways to bore your readers are all tension slayers. And that's why I added them, because these are all things that can kill tension in a story. And then I want to add also, a piece that isn't edited well can also make a work undesirable. Too many grammatical errors or plot holes destroy tension in a story. I've read lots of stories where it's getting really, really good, and then there's like, okay, she says she didn't drink coffee, but she's drinking coffee in this paragraph. Like, as a writer, we pick those things up. And it's hard for us, and it's hard for me, I'm sure, to read a book and not edit it along the way. I mean, raise your hand if you do not edit a book. I know we all edit a book as we read it. And so it's hard to read a piece that has a lot of grammatical errors, because then we won't either finish it, or we will think, unfortunately, a little lesser of that author, unless they have like just, great pieces. It's just such a great piece that you can look past it. But for the most part, it's just very difficult. Okay, so number 8, and this is my favorite. Keep your readers curious. A curious reader is an engaged reader. And if you have an engaged reader, you have someone that will read until the last page. In order to keep your readers asking questions, you have to put little bits and pieces in your story that will lead them to turn the page. So, a cliffhanger at the end of a chapter, subtle or overt, will be key. It has to move the story along, but it must also keep your audience guessing. So, you want to make sure that, for example, I had at the end of a chapter, I had a piece where there's a character, and this is a book that I just completed. So it's not one of these up here. It's one that I just finished. And there was a phone conversation that was happening, and it was very subtle. At the end of the chapter, let me see if I can remember. I'm getting old, guys. I'm not as young as I was when I first started this group. But there was a phone conversation, and she, in her dialogue, outer dialogue, this woman was basically going over, okay, well, I'm gonna text this guy that she's cheating her husband with, and I'm gonna see if he's interested in me. She's going through all this turmoil about it, and she texts him, and then she spends all this time worried about his text and if he's gonna text back. And then at the end of the chapter, he texts back, and all he says is, I haven't forgotten about you. And the whole point is that it was very subtle, but now people want to turn the page and see, okay, what happened with this woman and this guy? And it's something that I find very important. You want to keep your readers curious. So it doesn't have to be a huge cliffhanger where somebody's actually hanging off a cliff. Like, it doesn't have to be something that huge, but it has to be something that makes them turn the page. So that's just one chapter. So each chapter has to have something like this that keeps the readers going to the very end of the book. And last but not least, the tension has to be rooted in conflicts that fit your genre. So, genre is important to me. So important that I did an entire video on it on YouTube, on my channel. When a reader picks up a book in a specific genre, they are looking for and expecting to find key conflicts and situations. So, in a murder mystery, what do you think a reader is expecting? Right, a murder. A mystery. They're looking for clues that they can pick up on. And they want to have the mystery solved at the end of the book, because that would really suck if you get to the end of the book and you still don't know who killed who. So these are things that people who read murder mysteries want to know. So let me turn the page. In my genre, in a romantic suspense, there must be a romance, a conflict surrounding that romance, some suspense, and sometimes a little bit of action. So my book, Burn Daily Desires, not only is a romantic suspense, but it's also a murder mystery. So there's a murder and a mystery in that book. So I had to do 2 different genres and combine them. But I really push that you need to research or focus on what makes your genre tick and write your attention based on what your audience would be looking for. So we all went over like what is in a murder mystery, and I told you what's in a romance suspense, what's in a thriller, what's in just a plain romance. You want those things to be there, so you have to do the research and figure out what your readers are looking for when they're reading that. And basically, your genre is, you don't have to, and in my video I said you don't have to, like, I didn't stick to just one genre. You don't have to do that. You can create your own genre. because there are lots of people who are interested or are looking for something new. So you don't have to just stick to, you know, typical genres that are in the list that we have. You can create your own. And I basically created my own by combining two. But I stuck with what a romantic suspense is like and what a murder mystery is like. And so I'm gonna pick up murder mystery readers, and I'm also gonna pick up people who are interested in a romance added to that. And that is, that opens it up for a wider audience. So, I hope I didn't talk too fast. I hope you understood me. And I am open to any questions that you may have with the page turner method or on how to board your readers. So if anybody has any questions, yes, Sandy.
Donnée, can you explain how you wove those two genres together?
Yes. So basically, with romantic suspense, like I said before, you just want a little bit of suspense surrounding a romance. So what I did was, in that book, basically you have a romance that's happening between two people, and then you have an antagonist, which is a brother of one of the men who actually wants the same woman. So you have two men who want the same woman. So that's the romance, and that's the suspense around it. But I also have, on the side, you have someone, okay, they work in a sort of like an escort service, and someone's killing the escorts. And the main character is also an escort. And so they're trying to figure out who's killing these escorts in this lounge that they work for. And in that process, the main character, ends up being in the crosshairs of the killer. So you have this murder, and the book starts off with the murder. So you have a murder, and then in that, they have a romance going on. But in the middle of that romance, there's a killer out there. So that's how I put them together. And then, of course, like I said before, at the end of the book, you find out who's actually doing the killing. And the thing is that with the three main characters, you don't know if it's one of them. And that's how the book goes. So, you're welcome. Sin?
So that's your A and B plot.
Mm-hmm.
Plots. So two-part question. How many plots do you
Can you speak up, Cynthia?
How many plots and subplots do you generally have? And then what is your plotting method?
Oh, okay. Okay, I'm not gonna remember both of those, so I'm gonna come back to you for the second part. So I usually have, let's see, one or two. So I have a main plot, and the main plot is the couple and their romance, because it's leaning toward more of a romantic suspense. And then so you have that main romance, and then you have the brother who's trying to break that up. So that's the main plot. And then the subplots, of course, is the murder, and then there's and then this one, the killer actually is a character. So you have his plot of murdering people and his reasoning for murdering. So for this one, you have, I think, 2 subplots in it. And then what was your second question?
What's your method for plotting a novel?
Oh, I would say I'm an outliner, so I outline everything. I basically start with and I start with a little bit of like paragraphs, and then I just like do a couple paragraphs, and then I kind of put it together like a puzzle, and then I outline each chapter all the way to the end. Now the outline doesn't stay the same. The outline does change, because as I'm moving along, the characters might tell me something. They might say, no, we don't want to do that. So I changed the outline based off of that. And working with Joan, I have become somewhat, this last novel, a pantser. So I've experienced that as well. But for the most part, I outline all my novels and put the plots in where they fit, and then weave it together like a puzzle. I hope that explained. Okay. Tammy?
I'm gonna go on that because your characters are like so freaking fantastic, and they have such really huge personalities, and I fall in love and hate with some of their decisions and their actions. do you outline your characters as much as you outline your book? Because it's like you know the character after a while. You know the person. I love that.
Yes. I do outline my characters. Like my characters are real people to me. And I go through and I know their whole entire lives. I know their backstory. I know how things, how they skinned their knee when they were 5 years old. Like I know those things about my characters. Because in order to know those things, I have to, like I said in here, in the handout, you basically have to know your characters that much to make sure that they're authentic. You want them to be real people. And when I write my stories, I want to make sure that they are real people and make sure they're realistic. These are people that are relatable and that people can, even though they're going through some crazy stuff, like an escort in a lounge with, murders and things like that, I want to make sure that these are people and they respond how a normal person would to a huge situation. They're not heroes, but they are heroic in the things that they do, and that's what I want to come off as, that normal people can be heroes in certain situations if that's a part of their personality. Yes.
Do you use any word programs like Scrivener or Grammarly or any of those?
Yes, because I'm not that great with grammar. I'll admit that. I do use that, but I also use my critique group a lot, and they're really, really good, and they catch a lot of things. Because my biggest problem is echo words. Like I will use the same word a lot, and they catch those things for me. So I learned I've grown in the sense that I've learned how to use my thesaurus. And so I'm really good at that, but yeah, did I answer your question?
No, well, what about Scrivener? Have you ever used that?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I just use Grammarly and I rely on my critique group.
Okay.
Yes, gay.
I didn't know if you saw my hand.
Yeah.
On the bottom of page 3, you said the 6 ways to bore your reader are all tension slayers.
Yes.
What are the 6 tension slayers?
Yeah, they're the first thing. The how not to bore your readers. All 6 of those things. Yeah, all 6 of those things are what I mean by those are tension slayers. Like they will definitely ruin tension in a piece, in a story, and that's why I included them, because in the page turner method, I basically